coming up. There's nothing wrong with pushing in on it. And what are you afraid of? That's what we always ask. Like, are you afraid something's going to fall out and you're not going to believe in God? Then you just have a straw man for a religion. You don't actually have a true belief in God, So be curious. I came across a great phrase about what we're talking about, and it says the heart of what we're saying is we're not poking holes in faith with science. We're worshiping through discovery.
Oh, yeah. That's beautiful.
I love that.
That says it more gracefully than the point I was trying to make.
All right, welcome back to On the Table. Glad to have you all. And we are today talking about something kind of fun, different, scientific. If we can get scientific, I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know how to hold this. Does that look good, Mr. Cameraman? All right. So today on the table, we're putting the spinning globe, which is also at a perfect tilt, because what we're talking about today is the perfect, and I mean perfect, dialing in of the creation. Specifically, I think we're going to talk a little bit about Earth, but we might take a little bit about the whole creation of the whole universe, kind of zero into the Earth. But just the fact that that God actually, I could ask the question, did God dial in creation for man? But I think we all believe he did. So maybe you don't, but we're not here to convince you. We're just here to just admire God and just to be excited about what he did. So anyway, I'm just rambling on, but I think it has a scientific name that I just cannot ever remember for 5 seconds. Anthropic principle. There you go.
And as you can tell, we're all scientists.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We know exactly what we're talking about.
Absolutely. We've all we're sort of like wannabe hobby scientists. Hopefully there's a lot of you out there that are the same. Various study degrees, I mean, not degrees, but we've studied to various degrees of different kinds of things, but definitely just excited about God, so.
I think it's cool, if I may interject here.
Please do.
That scientists throughout the ages have, studied this. Christian scientists have studied, non-believing scientists have studied. And I think that a lot of times it's our presuppositions that we go toward studying science and studying this concept that kind of directs where we go and how we look at the data. The data is the same for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. But different people take it in different ways. And I wanted to give an example of that with this.
What does that say?
So some people read it as God is nowhere. And other people read it as God is now here. And it really does work, because I had two different people read it and they read it two different ways. So the thing is, people like Newton and Kepler and Faraday, they were Christians and they were studying science to glorify God, to see the glory of God in the creation. And then there's other people who go toward it to kind of say, well, God didn't do it. God didn't create, but it was all by natural, things that happen naturally. So we are definitely, as a group, going toward it to glorify God in his creation, looking at his creation that way. So
I think there's a lot of people that brings up a kind of another concept that you find out there. It's called God in the gap. And if you haven't heard about that, basically the idea is that, hey, look, there are scientific answers for everything. And even things that seemed supernatural or in the Bible or whatever else, there is some scientific explanation for it. And basically, as believers, sure, we'll just throw the God thing out if we just haven't arrived at understanding something fully enough. But once we can explain it scientifically, then we don't need God to be the answer to that. But it comes at it with the attitude that, that God didn't do supernatural things and that we're just using him as a crutch for things we don't understand. And also that God didn't create the earth and didn't do that, there was no purpose in it and stuff like that. And that's the purpose of science could suddenly become trying to figure things out outside of God. And even as a believer, the God in the gap theory isn't for non-believers. Obviously, they would never have God in the gap. They just throw God out. But a lot of believers just put him in the gap like, well, I can always just rely on, well, maybe God just did it some way, you know. And I think we've all done that to some degree. Mm-hmm. But it's challenging to say, don't do that. Look at it more like our job as Christian scientists, not the religion Christian Science, but Christians who just want to understand the world around us for the sole purpose of like pushing in and being enamored by how God did it, that we're discovering what God did, not discovering what the science is and then, you know, fitting God in where we need to fill in an equation. It's like, there's no fitting God in. He created it.
Sure.
He is it. You know?
Yeah. So. I think people try to use science to prove or disprove God. And I think to be completely fair with all the research I've done, I think you have good arguments on both sides. If you're going just off the right now in 2025 science, you're going to hear, oh, well, the Earth is 17 billion years old, or it's 80 billion this year. Like, you know what I mean? Like, well, how do you explain that with God? That one, there are certain things that are hard in certain ways. And if you have a bias towards an opinion and you look at science, you can try to fit science into your bias a little bit. I mean, I think that's fair to say. But I think if we're using science as saying like, this is evidence that there's a God, I wouldn't say that. So I don't know, like a nail in the coffin. I would say evidence. I would say, let me back up. I wouldn't say it's proof is the right terminology. I think there's evidence that points to it, but I wouldn't say it's proof, because if it's proof, it's indisputable. And I do believe it is a little bit, but if I go into that category of being so hard-headed on it and saying like, obviously everything in science proves what I believe, then I'm wrong, because there are things in science that don't prove what I believe, because 100 years ago, science wouldn't have proved what I believed. It took time for science to build up its discovery and get to a point where some things do and some things don't. And I think if people are, you know, these scientists that are doing this, if they're coming in here with a purpose of, I'm going to disprove God, it's like, I don't think they're looking at science right, in my opinion. It should be, I have a theory or a thought and I want to test it and see what the results are, but science never stops. It's always going to keep building it. What people, when you said an atom 80 years ago, this person studying that now and then couldn't hold a conversation together. The person back then would have a completely different concept about how it worked, what it might have looked like, what was inside of it. And now someone knows a lot more about it. And I think that science goes hand in hand with God. But I just think that's, I don't know. It's just an interesting thing that I've noticed is people are like, oh, look, it proves or it disproves. And it's like, I don't think it proves or disproves. It's evidence that can go along with the idea that there's a creator, and it makes the odds that there's not a creator seem improbable. And almost like, well, how else could you explain this? But yeah. I don't think it's like, it's proof, like no one can dispute this, or else you wouldn't have atheist scientists.
I like what you're saying with that, because the true heart of science, which I like, I think I have, I love it. It's exploration. It's not, the idea of science isn't, I've got something that I want to prove, so I'm going to kind of make sure and just listen to the parts that prove that and throw everything else out. That's like the opposite of science, right? Yeah. The whole scientific method is, okay, sure, have a theory, test it, but be willing to, whatever falls out, that's at least, you know, either proved or disproved, or just you need some more research or whatever else. And that's the way we around here on the table, we like to look at the Bible that way too. And some people, I'm sure, will criticize that, like, oh no, you should just take what everybody's ever said. You know, church fathers and history, you know, how could you be smarter than them? And we're not saying we're smarter, but the Word of God is active and alive today, and it's available to all of us. That was the whole Martin Luther
and we have the
thing,
Holy
right?
Spirit who
we have the Holy Spirit living in us, and so. And so I think there's nothing wrong with pushing in on it. And what are you afraid of? That's what we always ask. Like, are you afraid something's going to fall out and you're not going to believe in God? Then you just have a straw man for a religion. You don't actually have a true belief in God, you know? So be curious. I came across a great phrase about what we're talking about. And it says, the heart of what we're saying is, we're not poking holes in faith with science. We're worshiping through discovery.
Oh, yeah. That's beautiful.
I love that.
That says it more gracefully than the point I was trying to make.
So let's start off. Well, let's get back to the point at hand here. I know everybody's loaded for bear here on lots of stuff. So if somebody had principles about the whole universe, I'll let you talk first, because I don't want to be the one to talk about this, but Otherwise, I might start there and just narrow in on the
Yeah,
Earth
go for it.
just briefly. I don't want to spend a lot of time because, the universe is kind of big. There's a lot of objects in it. But I just want to start for just a second because there's this whole concept that bugs a lot of scientists. There's a couple of them, really, when you talk about the universe and the beginnings of the universe. Basically, the state of the universe right now is a state of entropy, and it's a state of increasing entropy. And I think a lot of people understand entropy. Maybe some people don't. There's funny ways to describe it, like you can describe it in terms of a teenager's bedroom that you just cleaned. So that would be a state of order. And then naturally, it's just going to have entropy. And a couple weeks later, or maybe a couple hours later, it's going to look like a mess. It's a silly description, but it's at least a good rudimentary one, sure. Right? I think I'm trying to come up with a better one that had to do more with creation. It's more like if a master painter was hired to make a mural in Holly Springs here, and they had this great wall, and they spent 6 days, let's say, making this beautiful painting, right? Just put all their creative stuff, and man, people came from miles around and said, that you have captured the essence of Holly Springs. That is so beautiful. But think if you came 7,500 years later and looked at that same mural, if it was still up there, what would you see?
Decayed, chipping.
Yeah.
Fading.
Fading, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But when you saw that,
Tagging.
Would you just go, wow, somebody was amazing that they could paint a mural that looked like it was 75 years old? Or what assumptions might you draw from that?
It's old.
That it's old and fading and decaying and the entropy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, but that would lead you to the idea that it started off in a very orderly, beautiful fashion and has fallen from that. Okay. So those are good, sort of simplistic, but we said we're going to be scientific. So let's be a little deeper on that. So entropy, when we talk about the scientific version, it has to do with the laws of thermodynamics. And the idea is that energy basically starts off in a pure sort of available energy, or we might say, a potential energy state. So there's matter starts off with a lot of potential energy. But once that energy has been used and transformed in from matter to energy, that the state of the matter itself, what's left over, is useless. A good example of that we have every day. We have a power plant here, a nuclear power plant just down the road, not too many miles from here. And when they're done producing the nuclear energy out of the reaction that they do in that, at the power plant there in the reactor, they're left with these fuel rods that you can't get any more energy out of. Now they're radioactive and they're dangerous, and so we have to bury them for 10,000 years and all this other stuff. But you'll never be able to pump those back in the factory and produce some more electricity. Okay, sure. It's true of the whole universe. So if we look at the universe right now, we're seeing a lot of depleted energy and a lot of stuff like that. Well, that had to have started off as energy available. Long story, a little bit shorter. Most scientists that study the beginnings of the universe would say that the universe started off in great order, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that's kind of interesting because in 1,000 years ago, there was a man named Nachmanides. He was a Jewish sage, and he would put himself in a trance and just start kind of meditating on Genesis. And we don't know how he got himself in a trance. I don't think I want to know, but anyway, but then he would see this transcendentally. He would see things in the book of Genesis, and then he wrote them down. And so he wrote, believe it or not, he wrote a whole book on his transcendental thoughts about the book of Genesis. And he said some really wacky things back then. He said, you know what? God told me in the book of Genesis, I can see it clearly now, that the world was created in 10 dimensions, for instance. This was 1,000 years ago, but guess what? Now, brilliant scientists are saying, hey, the superstring theory, the uniting theory of the universe is that it was created in 10 dimensions, right? That's kind of wild. Long before any of that, this guy just said that, right? Mm-hmm. But he also said that Genesis taught him that the world started in great order, and that God had language in the book of Genesis that said, look, the world started in order and by God who created it, and then it's become decayed. And he looked at the words for evening and morning, Erev and Bokar, that if you notice in the first part of creation, you remember how it always says, it's sort of repetitive. It says, oh, in the beginning, and that was there was evening and morning is the way we translate it in English. Mm-hmm. But Erev and Bokar means, the roots of them, they came to mean evening and morning, which is funny that he said evening and morning, and you'll see why in a second. It was a hint towards this entropy thing. I got to move along because I'm going to.
No, it's good. I want.
But the evening was the first statement that God always made. And evening in its root form, erev, means basically something that is disorderly. It means it's a term of entropy. That's like, because if you think it, and the reason it became used for evening is because as the sun sets and things get darker, you can't tell what you're looking at. Things are kind of disordered. And then the morning is when the sun's rising, and all of a sudden you can see things and things are more clear. So from erev to boker was a kind of a hint that, hey, things are going from disorder to order, disorder to order. He says it 6 times. And at the end, he says everything's, hey, this is good, this is good, this is good. And then at the end of the 6th day, he says what? In our English, most English translations say it is
very,
very good. Right? Well, another guy back in that same time, I think his name was Okeanos. You can look that up if you want. By the way, man, we're going to miss a lot of stuff here. So take the time to look all this stuff up. I forget the guy's name, but he was also a contemporary writer and sage. And he said that the language that he was a language expert. He wasn't so much the guy that was like in transcendental meditation. But he said that the difference of the words on the good and the very good actually meant things are in perfect order now. So put all that together and say that what the universe was, that everything went from chaos. Remember, right before the creation starts, it says what? That the God looked upon, he brooded upon the waters, the deep, and everything was what?
Without form and void.
Without form and void. So chaotic. It didn't have purpose. It didn't have function. It was chaotic, right?
Yeah.
And then it also says that, then he says, let there be light, and he starts the creation and that kind of stuff, right? So modern scientists believe now that the world was in perfect order without any entropy, which, by the way, you quoted this a little while ago when we were just chatting about this. What's the odds that out of all the possibilities and all the factors they produce, it's
10 to the 10th to the 123rd power.
123rd, 10 to the 123rd power, which is just an enormous number. In other words, it's impossible. But that's the odds. So here, think about creation. So God, it's the other thing about a lot of the creation scientists believe that there was a Big Bang. I don't know, there's been a lot of different things about the Big Bang, but it's still a very popular theory, and to some degree it's probably true. I believe in it.
Yeah.
And so Big Bang agrees that there was like a super dense, that all the mass of the universe was in this super dense thing. And think about it. So God is holding on to this, right? And then it says, let light be, or let there be light. But actually, most people that really study the language say it's let light be, which makes sense because if everything was so densely, the gravity would be so ridiculously strong that even light would be sucked in like in a black hole. And so then as he expanded it, because Isaiah says that he unrolled like a curtain, he stretched out the universe, right? And so then he stretched that out, and he did it just the right timing. If he stretched it out too fast, by the way, then the stars would just have become gas, and then there wouldn't have been any stars, there wouldn't be any planets or anything else. If he stretches out too slow, then everything stays way too dense, and the heat and everything actually burns everything up, and everything becomes inert really fast. So we're here to talk about how perfectly he does it perfectly, right? So here we are today, and it went from perfect order to entropy, and scientists don't understand that. How could that be? That it doesn't work. But here's the other thing they don't understand, and then I'm going to shut up and see what you guys have to say about this. The other thing that exists today is that they all the equations that they have to try to model the universe fall really short when it comes to what's holding it together, because the far out galaxies are spinning way too fast. They should just be shooting out into nothing and falling apart based on what we understand about physics. The only explanation of that they call dark matter and dark energy, and they say that something on the perimeter of the universe is actually holding it together. I'm not making this stuff up. So my picture of God doing this, he didn't do this and fling it. He did this and he's still holding it. But we have scriptures that say that, right?
Yeah.
We have scriptures that say he holds all things together. And it's just funny to me that the stuff that the scientists can't figure out, the Bible's actually just said. They're like, well, we don't understand why there's this background. So they made up a thing called dark matter and dark energy, which is 68% of the energy in the universe they can't find. So they call that. It's not like some 5%, 68% of the energy that's needed to keep the universe together is considered dark matter because they don't know where it is.
So they put dark matter in their gap instead of God.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good one. So
Good stuff.
in the creation, he gets down, he makes Earth. No, I don't know if he wants to talk about the universe anymore, but that's you guys pick up something you studied.
We can decide to keep this in or not. One of my favorite guys that I like watching, I think his website and his YouTube is called Cross Examined, which is kind of funny. Cross Examined. Dr. Frank Turek, he dug really, really deep into like the I don't know if the right term is the fine tuning, but the creation.
Yeah.
And like, there's got to be a creator. There's no way there's not a creator. And one of the things that he came up with is called SURGE. It's an acronym, and I'll read through them. So he says the second law of thermodynamics. This law states that entropy disorder increases in closed systems over time. So apologists argue that an eternal universe would eventually run out of usable energy, so it must have had a beginning.
Yeah.
And if creation, and science says this now, creation, I mean, scientists say there's a beginning now, right? That wasn't the case.
Sure.
It was eternal, or it didn't have bounds. And I remember when I was growing up, I didn't study this stuff, but I thought the universe was infinite.
Right.
I didn't know there was an edge. And you're right, over the last decade or so, 5 years, you hear a lot about this dark energy, dark matter. We can see the first galaxy created now. Like, you can kind of see it out there, and we can start measuring it. So that's the S, second law of thermodynamics. The U is the expanding universe. So evidence suggests that the universe is constantly expanding, meaning that it must have came from a starting point.
Yeah.
Right? It's moving out.
Right.
From a single point. R, radiation afterglow. Also known as the cosmic microwave background radiation. This faint radiation left over from the Big Bang is seen as further evidence for a universe that had a beginning. Mm-hmm. The G is the great galaxy seeds, the primordial density fluctuations. So tiny fluctuations in the early universe are believed to be seeds for galaxies. Apologists argue that this fine-tuning suggests an intelligent designer. And then lastly, E, Einstein's theory of general relativity. This theory supports the idea of a universe with a beginning and ongoing expansion. So that's what he sort of came up with as his little bullet of like, let me just say all of what I've studied in one quick little thing, SURGE. And that's what he goes around teaching. And I like it. I mean, it's pretty cool. I've studied them a little bit, and what he says seems right, just based off secular science, even though it's all just science, but, like not going to like a Christian YouTuber to get answers or something. Like, it's accurate.
I love it.
The cosmological argument is that whatever begins to exist has to have a cause, like that something caused it, right? Mm-hmm. And since the universe began to exist at some point, it's not eternal forever backwards, then the universe has to have some sort of cause, something that caused it to exist. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
Which is kind of cool, because if you think about it, if something has a cause, that means it probably has a purpose. Which means that we're not just what was that quote? It's like everything is just indifference and just whatever, nothingness, and nothing really matters.
Random
it's like
nothingness.
No, I think hope is really important and purpose is important.
Yeah.
That reminds me of a scripture I'll read to you real quick. Isaiah chapter 45, verse 18 says, "For thus says the Lord Yahweh, who created the heavens, who is God, who formed the earth and made it, who has established it, who did not create it in vain, who formed it to be inhabited. I am Yahweh, and there is no other."
I love
That's
that.
awesome.
That leads us right into the Anthropic thing. Like, so God created the earth specifically to be inhabited by all sorts of things, but crown creation was us, right? Mankind. So bring something to the table about that. What's so cool about Earth, like, that makes it so crazy? Just bring any one subject. It's just so crazy fine-tuned about Earth that if anything was slightly different about that thing, it wouldn't be fine-tuned. We wouldn't have such a great experience.
I mean, there's, simple stuff like how close we are to the sun. Like, if we were just a little bit closer, we'd burn up. A little bit farther away, we would be too cold. Like, even just that is.
And we're not talking about
amazing.
the difference between the husband and wife in the bed, like, I'm freezing, I'm sweating. We're talking about the difference between solid ice cube and total crispy.
Yeah, life and not life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, just that one. And it doesn't take much, right? Like, there's other planets that aren't that far away from us that don't look very inhabitable. Either they're too cold or too hot, right? So
I have to quote people here because I don't have a lot of.
You go for it, man.
I like so Paul Davis, who's a theoretical physicist and cosmologist, said the fine-tuning of the universe is not just a matter of the universe's expansion rate, but also of the values of the fundamental constants.
Oh, yeah.
The precision required is astonishing. If the cosmological constant were off by 1 part in 10 to the 120th power, life would have been impossible.
And that's the that's the one that has to do with the expansion rate you were just talking about, that constant, by the way. So, and that's why I was saying, if God pulled it apart too fast, we're all dead.
Yep.
If he pulls it apart too slow, we're all dead. Well, we never made it, you know?
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
all
gravity
the
is another
constant,
one, right?
yeah, gravity and all those constants that science has come up with, all those formulas that we know those are constants.
Yeah.
Like there's a handful of them. If any one of them was off, then it doesn't work.
Even a small percentage,
Right,
that's
a
what's wild
teeny
about
tiny,
it.
like a
Yeah, you
hair.
just said.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that includes what? Gravity, speed of light, Planck's constant, the one you just mentioned, I can't even remember it.
Anthropic?
No,
No.
Oh, the
Expansion.
constant,
fundamental constants?
yeah, I can't remember that, but anyway. But yeah, there's all these like scientific constants, and these aren't things that people are like seeing change over time. That's what's cool. A lot of things do change over time. Mm-hmm. These things don't. These are like specific things. There was a group that was trying to prove at one time that the speed of light was changing. I think his name was Barry Setterfield, and he had a partner, but I think most of their stuff got discounted many years ago. But I don't think these things change, right? So, so that's pretty wild. But if they had, so what are the odds that, everything just happened to be perfect? We put this thing on the table, and it represents the Earth with a little ship inside of it or something. No, I'm just kidding. But the Earth's at a tilt, right? Sometimes, what happened? What's that all about? Is that important to life on Earth?
Yeah. I mean, the ice caps would like either be frozen or just thawed totally. So it'd be either like flooded or
right.
I don't
It's
know.
amazing,
Like,
right? If it's like 23 some degrees, right? Like you're saying. So if it was just a little bit more, then all of a sudden we have, right, the ice caps melt, the oceans rise, all the stuff that people keep threatening with global warming and stuff like that at a huge degree. Like all of it actually comes true, right? Mm-hmm. And like you're saying, but a little bit more, then we get these really cold parts during winter that actually freeze stuff, and the oceans begin to freeze more, and we get to have less water and all sorts of problems.
and the cool thing is the moon, like it helps regulate that tilt.
That's wild. Yeah.
Yeah. It helps establish it and keep it where it is. You
I
know?
didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of think this little moon, this little rock out there, what in the world? It's kind of pretty to look at, stuff like that. But tell us all the cool stuff.
You go
it
and sit under the moon with your love, and you
There you
kiss
go.
and you look up at the stars.
And there's that little Fisher boy on there in the movies.
Yeah.
Just kidding. He has
And
a
a
place
cow
to,
jumping
he has a
over
place
it.
to sit, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about the size. Like, what about the size of
Well,
the moon?
yeah. Okay. So the moon in its size relative to the distance to the Earth, compared to the sun and its size, relevant distance to the Earth. When you look up at the sky, they look like they're the same size, which because of that, we get a lunar and a solar eclipse where they can cover each other. And no other planet in the solar system has that.
Interesting.
We've
That's
never
true.
witnessed that anywhere. Think about how just, I don't know if anybody even followed exactly what she's saying, because I think we just take that for granted. Oh, there's an eclipse, a total eclipse, and there's parts of the Earth, if you're in the right place, where it's a perfect eclipse. I mean, perfect. It perfectly covers it for a fraction of a second until some of the the rays of the sun come around. But think about that. Only way that happens, if you just kind of draw it out, is from the angles, is that the moon has to be exactly the right size compared to the sun in the right distance for that to actually look like it covers it. Like if I put my thumb, I have to back it up or move it to cover that camera that's in front of me, or to cover this thing. I can't because I'm too close to it, but I can cover Mike's face with my hand, but my hand's a lot smaller than Mike's face. Mm-hmm. But because I'm, I have to get perfect. So think about it. That wasn't just some accident. Like that doesn't normally happen. Like, oh, of course it happens that it covers it. It probably, think about it, it'd be easier for it to just completely cover it.
Yeah.
and the sun's like this big and the moon's like really big, or the other way around, right?
The distance between them is huge.
And I just think that's
Right.
God showing off a little bit. Like he made it exactly perfect, right?
Yeah.
That's just super cool.
And the Bible goes, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, doesn't the moon also like have to do with how the ocean waves
Yes.
are and all
The
that?
tide.
Yeah.
And what happens if we don't have
Gravity.
tide? What happens to the water in the ocean if it just sits stagnant?
I'm assuming it gets gross.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing.
Stuff dies,
Stuff
but-
dies. It doesn't. I mean, oxygen gets mixed in there, and plant life gets to live and move around, and
I mean, it would be covered at some point with just filth. Like, think about, you look at the ocean where they do these cleanups, like, and they'll be like, look at all the trash out in like Antarctica that came from some place, you know what I mean? And it's like massive amounts, but it's because it's getting pushed away.
right.
Yeah,
Right.
which is kind of interesting to think about. If it was just sitting there and you couldn't make a big enough splash to do anything, it would just be just sitting there, just constantly.
Right. And so huge things happen, like you guys are getting at, like whole populations of different types of fish and whales and things like that would die off because they survive because of the movement of the ocean, because it brings new food in to their path. It also causes the different kinds of channels in the ocean because of the moon. So we get things like trade winds, we get things like weather patterns. The whole hydrological cycle is dependent on different temperatures within different parts of the ocean and them changing and moving around a little bit. And so sometimes that's
which creates clouds, and the clouds
Right.
go over the land. We remember from elementary school,
Yeah.
and the little puffy cloud goes over here, and then it rains down, and
Yeah.
then it goes down the river. And
Yeah, you
Well,
wouldn't
the
have
water-
crops, right? It would,
Yeah.
that would everything
No.
would be affected.
everything would be a desert on land and be dead in the sea. So, and there it is. So God makes a moon that's like perfectly set, perfect size, perfect gravitational force, and then shows off to go, hey, by the way, I'm just going to make it to where it actually blocks the sun occasionally just perfectly, so that you just in case you thought this was all an accident, right?
Sure, and I like it. I think so much about how the Bible talks about the stars and the moon and the sun, like to look at it for signs and see things. And you know, you got like Job's Pleiades and remarks about Pleiades and Orion. Like, it was important. Like, I think they do serve a purpose.
yeah, and we talked about the on day 4, what you were mentioning, he created the moon, and he set lights in the sky. And the moon, even though it doesn't produce its own light, it is reflective, and so we do have a light that's doesn't produce its own, but it's reflecting the sunlight. So we have a light at night, and then when it's full, especially, we notice that, and then we have the light during the day. So it does give light at night. That's one of the cool things that it does, so that we can
It's kind of crazy. It's like
Yeah.
a big mirror.
yeah.
Reflection.
Right. And so I think that, I mean, that's just amazing. The only other thing I want to mention is like the planets, the size of the planets and where they're located in our solar system is really important, because their gravitational pulls are what helps keep our, trip around the sun and all that in sync and where it needs to be. And then with the spin of the earth and the traveling around, like with the moon and the stars and the sun, they do help us with signs of the seasons, and of course the earth tipping and the different seasons that we get, so that we can endure our summers in the heat, but we also get a break in the wintertime.
Oh, yeah.
Get to have some
And
cool weather.
Plants rely on that too, like,
Right.
and animals and creatures, like, you know what I mean. If we just had summer all day long, like, be
Right, and he
Pretty
created the plants to need. I pulled last fall, I pulled seeds off of my Japanese maple, and I was looking up, well, how do you propagate these? And they have to go through a freeze. They have to go through cold weather for a snap, for a time, and so that they can kind of reset. And so God created that in tandem with the fact that we have cold weather, so that they can.
That's so nice
Yeah.
of the tree to evolve. Just exactly how it needed to. Because it needed to survive by dying during the winter.
I think it's cool too. Simple things that we don't think about, but like water. Water is very wild. All the things that are depicted as representative of God have crazy, awesome, powerful characteristics that don't make any sense, right? Light. We could talk forever about light. But since we're talking about Anthropic, I think, am I getting this word right?
Yeah.
The Anthropic principle. water is truly amazing, because the reason why it's truly, it's amazing in a lot of ways, but one thing about it anthropically is that it is actually one of the few substances known in the universe that is actually less dense as a solid than it is as a liquid. So think about that for a second. Most things, when they become solid, they're more dense. It sort of feels like what density is like becoming solid is getting more dense, right? Most substances are that way. Things that melt would be, when they're not melted and they're not fluid, they would be more dense. It turns out that water forms a crystalline structure that leaves so much gap in it when it becomes ice that it's actually less dense. You know that because if you throw an ice cube in your water, what happens? It floats.
Oh, yeah.
Now, what if ice didn't float? That would be a huge problem.
Yeah, all the sea creatures would die, right?
Right, because what would happen?
Well, a big chunk of ice would float to the bottom and kill them, right?
Yes, and also because light doesn't reach the bottom of the ocean very much, it wouldn't just be that some of the ice that was like, say, in the polar caps, you're right. If that happened, that would be a bummer. But scientists say this: if ice didn't float, the bottom of the ocean would slowly just become one big solid ice chunk until it filled up about half of the ocean. And so, yeah, and it would be so cold and so uninhabitable that all of the fish that he created on day 40. I get my days wrong. 5. Yeah, I know. I've memorized a lot of different parts of the Bible, and that is one thing I just have not spent a lot of time memorizing the days of creation. I should do that, but anyway, but yeah. So it's like, man, it's just, that's wild.
Yeah, that's crazy.
There's a lot of other things that we could get into with that particular one fact, but it's just one out of a million things that if that was different, you know, if ice sunk, then we're sunk, right? What other ones? Does anybody have any other principles like that? Simple principles?
I mean, just like air, just thinking about how it, like the fact that what we breathe out is what trees breathe in, and what they breathe out is what we breathe in, and it's this cycle, kind of like the water cycle as well. It's like, what if those elements didn't recycle? Like, what if they got used up because that's how it randomly came together? Like,
right.
It's just something that we take for granted because we don't have to think about breathing, but it just happens, right?
This might be a stupid question. I've studied a lot of this over time, but I don't understand, for people that believe that the Earth just happened to be perfect like this, like, what do they say about stuff like this? Like, did the tree evolve like how they say humans evolved? And it just happened to be at the same exact time, like just enough oxygen. The tree evolved just at the right time for enough oxygen for the first humans? Or like, did they say the trees had to evolve to produce oxygen for no creatures that existed yet? And then later on, a little amoeba got struck by lightning and turned into something? Like, what is I hear all sorts of crazy things on the internet. Like, do you guys know did all of this just evolve in their opinion for itself for no reason? Or
yeah, I mean, certainly what you're getting at is that these systems that depend on one another are a real problem for evolution, right? Not just macro systems like you're talking about with trees and people, but even with our own bodies, we have things within our own body that are systems that aren't connected to one another but are dependent on one another to make it. So it is a problem for evolution, because how do those systems evolve by themselves, but they are completely codependent on one another? It doesn't make any sense. I've heard different things, nothing ever very satisfying, and it's not. I don't say that just because I'm a believer in creation and don't believe in evolution. Really, I've tried to have an open mind to listen to evolutionists to try to explain that, but nothing's ever been satisfying to me that they try to say. They don't work their way around that and say, well, the different creatures were different while they were evolving and stuff like that. But a classic example of what we're talking about is of cart before the horse is, I was reading one time in National Geographic where it was saying they were using evolution as like some process that that's driven by need or something, which is funny. That's sort of the opposite of evolution, right? So when somebody said, so here was the phrase, they were talking about this particular creature that had a really long, thin finger that could reach way down in this particular type of plant to get to the bottom, because that's where the bugs were, and it could pull them out and eat them. And it said because it needed to get to the bugs, it evolved a long finger, which, if you know anything about the theory of evolution, is just a completely wrong thing to say, because as though the monkey or whatever the creature was just like, oh, I need a longer finger, and its finger started to grow. That's almost what you get out of that statement, right? Mm-hmm. That's evolution is a completely random process that would have happened like, oh, one of them had a mutation and got a little longer finger. But how did the whole species survive for millions of years? Well, it didn't have long enough fingers to eat their food, right? Yeah. Which I think is what you're getting at.
Yeah, how could the tree have lived if it needed what we give it?
Right. It doesn't make any sense. So.
And even all the zooming back out, even like all the planets, like we were just talking about being perfectly aligned for the gravitational pull to be just right and all of that, like spin the correct way and not be too close to the sun. If some of those things were there and others weren't at the same time, like, yeah, how did it all survive at that point?
Exactly. So I think kind of what we're saying is just, you know what, you could just relax. All the people that are just trying to like fight God and like, I've got to come up with an answer because it can't be God. I got a great answer for you. Just open your eyes and go, wow, how cool what God did. Because it's just all around you. You know, the Bible says the heavens declare the wonders of God. I mean, it's cool. It's actually a lot. And you might think, yeah, of course it's easier to be a Christian because you're stupid. But no, I'm like, stuff actually makes sense. We're actually smart people trying to actually make sense of the world around us. And when you put God in the middle of it, it starts to make lots of sense.
Yeah, it feels like
a missing piece. You got to go all around with these weird cockamamie things to try to find it, you know?
And like you're kind of bringing up, I feel like I've seen several times where scientific stuff almost personifies evolution.
Yeah.
Or the earth or nature. And at that point, really, it is their God.
It is. They're just
not calling it the God we believe in. But if you're going to personify nature and say that it chose to do this or that, is that not the same thing, just a different version? Like,
it absolutely is, right? So I love that. That's a great point. Yeah.
So we got down to we went from universe to planet down to human. So what if we go a little bit deeper?
All right.
Into the human. Does anyone here, has anyone here ever studied like DNA?
Sure.
A little bit.
What do you guys know before I start quoting random people?
There's an RNA thing.
All right.
To go along with your DNA thing. I don't know.
No, it's interesting you bring up RNA in the context of what we were just talking about. Because what RNA does is it's the thing that actually replicates DNA. It's what makes all the DNA strands. How in the world did DNA evolve without having RNA?
Primordial
Like if you have the little maker, but you don't have the maker to make the thing, how did the thing get made? Right? Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. But the biggest thing, DNA should be a game changer for anybody that's seriously discussing what we're talking about today. And I'm curious what you're going to read or talk about too, but I'll just say it this way. It should be an absolute game changer. And if it's not, you haven't really studied it. Why? Well, because DNA is not organic. It's digital. So the discovery of DNA should have just blown it all out of the water.
Wait, now you got to go. Now you got to talk about this
because we would tend to think natural things, there's an evolution and stuff just kind of oozed and, became a little longer and this formed and this happened and this was preferable. So over many, many generations, those other ones died off and the ones that had this kept that and all this other stuff, right? And we draw a picture to try to guide people by, monkey to ape monkey to person and you just think, yes, this is logical and all the other stuff. And then comes along DNA and we realize that instead of there just being this sort of stuff inside of us that makes us, there's an actual digital computer code inside of us that makes us. And it's so digital that you change any one of those digits around and stuff gets really messed up.
Yeah, and that's what the mutations come from that. And
right.
But all that and evolutionists want to act like, well, at least I don't know if they still do because I haven't studied this recently, but at the time when I was looking at it, that it's the mutations that causes, evolution or whatever. But mutation is always entropy. Right. It's always something
destructive.
Destructs or it adds like a frog with an extra leg, which doesn't help the frog. It actually hinders the frog, right?
But it's also, that's just a copy of existing things. It never actually creates
It doesn't create anything new.
It doesn't get a cat head or something or a cat tail on the frog because it just it needed to do that.
Well, because the way that I remember it from homeschool co-op science class is that it's basically, it's like a language, right?
Mm-hmm.
It gets read in, I think, basically 3-letter words, if you want to think of it that way. And so if you had a book full of all 3-letter words, if you insert a random letter somewhere in there, it throws off the entire sequence going forward. Because if it's going to take every 3 letters and read it as a word, and now you shove something in there, everything is off by 1 letter.
Right.
So you can't just randomly throw mutations in and expect it to still make sense.
It doesn't.
Right.
But how did it get to the point where we survive, we live, we have our existence only because not later on, DNA didn't show up later. It had to have been at the beginning, and it is. If you look at the most simple amoeba, single cellular being, it has the most crazy complicated DNA, just like we do. The DNA strands are just, they're the same thing. So in other words, it's always existed in life. So the beginning of life, because here's the part of evolution I want to say, well, it started simple. There's nothing simple about an amoeba. It has DNA. It has these crazy digital computer code that operates it, and it has the RNA that replicates it and checks it. It doesn't just replicate it, by the way. The RNA actually checks it and chops the ones in half that don't match the code. In other words, it knows the right code to make another amoeba.
Yeah.
It has a debugger. It has against hostile jamming or against defections. So as it's creating one, it actually does an edit check against it and goes, that wasn't a good copy. Throw that one out. Let's create another one. But that tells you something really crazy. It has the code inside of it. You know, how does it? I mean, that's just enamoring to me. I'm just thinking, God, it's so cool and sophisticated. It wasn't just like. I think, we used to live in New Mexico, and I think you can think of adobe houses that you just add water and kind of mold and shape the dough. It's not really how it works, but I think people think that. But I think that they think that's the way life was. It was just kind of molded and shaped and pulled and stretched and stuff like that. And it's like, no, it was designed super ridiculously, specifically. Now, one of the things that people will tell you, I'm curious if you guys have, we saw this in the elevator the other day at the hotel we were in, but it's kind of funny. But they'll say, But the DNA, here's the thing about evolution. Our DNA is like 98% the same as a chimpanzee or something like that, right?
Yeah.
It might even be more than that. But
I think it's very similar to like margarine too, or something.
Yeah,
like.
we're also, I think we're 92% of our DNA is similar to a banana.
Yeah.
So don't listen to that stuff. Do your research, guys. That's
because evolutionists aren't claiming that we came from bananas because of that, right?
No,
right.
But
they
apparently, I mean. So I like you're saying about the it being digital, to continue to go with the digital topic here. So the information, this is from Werner Gitt, who's an information scientist. He says the information content in a single gram of DNA is approximately 215 petabytes, which is 1 million gigabytes. This makes the information density of DNA far more efficient than any digital system that has ever been created, showing a level of complexity and precision that suggests there had to be an intelligent designer.
Yeah.
Amen.
215 petabytes in 1 single gram. Of DNA. And then one other one I like here is Michael Behe, who's a biochemist, says the DNA in every single human cell contains about 3 million nucleotide pairs. To think that this oh my goodness gracious, to think that this enormous information store with its specific intricate instructions for constructing and maintaining a human body could arise by chance is virtually impossible. It is more reasonable to conclude that it must have been from a designer.
Yeah.
So
I mean, if you think about it, like if you were to tell someone like, "Oh, I stood in my house with a bag of letters and threw it on the floor a million times, and guess what? It made a sentence that made sense that was 10 words long." Like, would they believe you? Probably not. And yet, with things that are so much more complex, and then not just one thing that is that complex, but everything in our entire existence and universe is that complex. And then you think it's not just one person throwing one bag of letters, it's like everybody in the world doing that times I don't know how many.
In fact, here's how ridiculous that is. In 1968, there was a man that actually did the math because they were looking at, well, how complicated is DNA? How complicated is this digital code? And people were saying, oh, there was this primordial soup in the beginning and going back to the beginning of the earth, right? And lightning hit it and the amino acids, formed the first, chromosomes and DNA was formed and all that kind of stuff. But they've actually done the math and the number is just absurd. the number is, talk about a big number. You said 10 to the 123rd. This is 10 to the 100 billionth. So just to put that in some sort of, this isn't even close. This doesn't even get you close. But let's just say that everybody knows that it's really hard to win the lottery, right? It's like 1 in 263 million chance. Okay. So let's say that somehow every atom in the known universe, 10 to the 80th, bought a lottery ticket every second since the Big Bang started. We're still not even close. And won. Every single one of them won every single time, every second that the universe existed. Every atom in the known universe bought a lottery ticket every second. That and hit the odds, and the odds reset every single second for every single one of them. And you add those odds together, we're still not even close. We're still millions of zeros away from how big the number is that life could have actually stacked itself together randomly to form DNA.
That's insane.
So for you to believe in that and say, "Oh, you guys having faith in God? Well, I have faith in science." I got to give it to you. You have a whole lot more faith.
Yeah. Like I don't remember if it's Frank Turek, the guy that I was, David Turek, Frank Turek, I think. I don't remember if it's him or someone else, but he wrote a book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And I was like, that's pretty funny because it's true. Like, it's totally true. To assume that there is no God, and some of these people like put their money on it. Like, I know for a fact, like, I'm like, what do you got though? I mean, there's a science, sure. There's some things that are interesting, but it'll keep learning over time, and they'll find new things. And there's a lot of science that goes to what we believe. But one of the big things for me is they can never account for our own experiences, right? Yeah. Like no one can tell me the stuff that I've experienced is false. And you can't look at every civilization ever. Yeah. All of them are religious. Every single one of them are spiritual. Like there's a reason for that. That was so much more true than what we have now. And now we're just filling it with information and filling it with all this knowledge. And it's like, are you saying that I'm insane? Like the experience I have are wrong or false, like, and all my family and all my friends and all the
majority
tens of billions of people before the last 100 years, before science was really big, the last few 100 years, like you're saying that every single person they built their whole life around these cultures and worshiped these things and did, like, every single one of them was insane. They made it up.
Like, and you can't take that away from people. I love what you're saying. That's exactly right. And that's why the Bible says that our testimony is so powerful, that people will overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. The point is our testimonies are powerful because people, sure, you can be a liar, but like you said, it's all Christians just lying about their personal testimonies about how God has changed their life and stuff. All of this kind of begs the question, like we're giving all this great evidence and we're all excited about what God did and how perfectly he tuned the world. And we didn't even get into how the fact that he created different kinds of foods and smells and colors. And it's not just about how it was tuned in the sense of so that we could survive. It was also tuned to the sense that we could be excited and have beauty and differences and good food and all that kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But the person's listening and getting their back up a little bit, and I feel for that person that's going like, oh, yeah, you're trying to make me sound like a fool because I believe in evolution or because I don't want to believe in God or I believe in science. Yeah, I do have faith in science and that kind of stuff. We're not here to knock you. But I do kind of wonder, are you really trying? Do you really feel so strongly that there's no God, or do you just not want there to be a God? And then it begs the question, if you're really fighting against God being true, I just, my heart goes out because I think probably that's because of some person that called themselves a Christian that made you not want their God. Sure. I'm just going to get really tough and just say it that way.
I'll admit that I probably was that person at some point in my life.
Same. Mm-hmm. I am too.
Yeah.
So don't take it on that. Take it. Part of the reason you can just look and go, wow, God's awesome by the stuff we're saying. But I just ask yourself, is it possible that you have the wrong attitude about God? Like maybe.
Yeah, because I think all that we've talked about shows how much care God put into creating and preparing this universe, this earth that he was eventually going to put people on, and that he loves us so much. And so the beauty of the creation, the perfection of it being so set just right, even the moon he put in the right place, all of these things because of his great love for us. And then, like you said, on top of that, of just saying, okay, my crown creation is going to be able to survive here, but not just survive, but thrive and enjoy things like a moonlit night, with your lover, or looking at all the different crazy animals that he created, or smelling all the beautiful flowers, eating all the really cool foods, and to be able to enjoy his creation, music, right? Yeah. And all of the going hiking or going swimming, or all these different things that we get to do and enjoy. And so, if you're listening to all this, I beg you to be open your mind to seeing that all of that is not about the science. It's about the God who is the scientist, who is the creator, who said, good stuff. I love my children. I love this creation that I made, these human beings that I can have a relationship with. I love them so much that I'm going to send my son to rescue them from their fallen world, from their sinful state. And that's the God who created all this science. That's the God.
I love that.
That you can open your heart and mind to.
I love that. Have you ever, us around the table, but also people listening, I think of it as that time. I hope everybody's experiences, but if you haven't experienced this, then please experience it. Where you take someone you care about and you just plan something cool, a cool day, a cool meal or something. And that feeling you have, I just want the table to be just right, or I want this setup to be right. And maybe it flopped, maybe they didn't like me, or whatever. That's not what I'm here to talk about. What I'm talking about is your attitude, like Laurel's saying, when you were doing that, and you were just so excited because you wanted it to be so cool. It could be for your kid, for your spouse, whatever else. But for the church, even, I remember that time we were putting up those hundreds of butterflies on the ceiling because we wanted people to just be thrilled about the concept that we're transformed and metamorphosized and stuff. And we were just so excited. We spent hours hanging butterflies from the ceiling.
And making them the week before.
Making them, right. and just now put that on God by a billion times. That's what God was doing. He's like, this is my people. I'm going to make Red Rock Cathedral in Colorado, and people are going to enjoy music, and there's going to be a natural shape of that's going to actually project the sound perfectly. It'll be a parabola that I just actually created nature. and I'm also the great mathematician as God. So I'm going to make it to where no matter where anybody sits in that theater, they'll be able to hear it just like they were sitting right next to the person. Just that little stuff. And I'm going to create oceans, and I'm going to create a moon that not only does all these functions so that that we can survive, but also, who doesn't like walking along the beach and having the waves crash in and stuff like that, and the sun rise up from there and all that kind of stuff.
Or the moonlight reflecting on the waves.
You know what? I'm going to create light that actually diffracts when it hits different wavelengths of different medium, and then I'm going to create the atmosphere to be different indexes of refraction so that they don't just see the sun come up and it's white. They see it come up and it's red and pink and yellow, and then it becomes blue, in some parts of the sky, and purple and... I just think God thought about all of that. None of that was random. We look at science so often say, I think we make the mistake, and there was a great quote on this, and I'm not going to remember it, but we make the mistake of basically in science of saying, feeling like we created something by understanding something. That's a really important thing to really caution people against. Because you finally figured something out doesn't mean you created it. It means you just discovered what God created. Yeah. And I think if we look at, science, the pursuit of science isn't so that man can be the master of the universe. The pursuit of science is to find out what God did. And then to just sit back and go, thanks, God, that's pretty cool. So, crazy stuff. Anything else?
No.
Well, if you're interested in this topic, look up Anthropic. I'm going to get it right, I think, because that was the Anthropic principle or fine-tuning principle. There's a couple different options that you can look up, and some of them are purely scientific. They're not even going to talk about God. So, but definitely look that up. You can find tons on it. You can ask ChatGPT. You can ask the Google. You can just ask scientists. There's lots of books on it. There's lots of
YouTube
videos, all stuff. If this has perked your interest, we're not scientists, so we barely scratch the surface. There's some really awesome stuff out there. And one way or another, I just encourage people to sit back and just relax and enjoy God and just dig in and go, wow, I can't believe you did that, God. And then come back and listen to the next On the Table.
Awesome. Thank you.